One of the really cool things we've enhanced in EiB Analytics 2.18 is our EiB AppStudio product. This is all about building MI and BI applications visually using our AppStudio product. And what I have here is I've got some Excel data and I want to transform that into an MI database, whether that be a SQL Server data warehouse and or a SQL Server analysis services OLAP cube. You'll see here I've got a workbook and I've got various sheets in this workbook, and the important one here is a sheet called AppStudio Data. You can see here I've got various measures in my columns in my Excel spreadsheet, and if I just scroll back from the measures, so I've got premiums and claims measures, and when I scroll back I've got my different dimensional data. So I've got class of business, whether that's motor, aviation, marine, non-marine, different regions in the world, UK, rest of the world, Europe, etc. And also my underwriting year and of course underwriting month within that. So I want to transform this into an application, but I don't know that much about SQL Server analysis services, and I want to do that now. So I go into the EiB AppStudio product. I can do that from the ribbon within Excel or call it as a standalone executable, and this gives me a blank sheet for me to build a visual MI application. On the left hand side here we have shown the different items here in the order that you build an application. So if you think about it, the first thing you need for any application of course is some data. Where am I going to get that data from? And I can obviously choose here, if I expand this menu, I can get it from a file or a database. Now you'll notice there's no showing of a database here. That's because we are defaulting here to a simple view, shape basic components. We have 3 views here. If I go to advanced components, then you'll see where I can pick information from databases, pick it from the web or other sources. But I'm just going to keep it simple here. We don't need all that. All I've got is an Excel workbook, so the basic components are absolutely fine. So the first thing is I know that I have that data in a file. What type of file? Is it a CSV or is it an Excel one? Well, we know it's an Excel workbook. I double click on the object. It now gives me an Excel workbook object. Now of course it doesn't know what workbook. It could be any workbook. I can pick the workbook from hard disk, or I can of course store it and pick the workbook from our own gallery. This is the insurance workbook that I'm interested in. So I've now loaded that entire workbook into the application, but of course when I'm going to work on that workbook I don't want all the sheets. A lot of the sheets were for information only, so I want to pick particular fields, which of course that is the next stage in the actual application. So if I just double click on pick a table, view or worksheet, now what's going to happen, I can drag these and lay them out, make them look aesthetically pleasing in the design. I double click on the selector and that now is going to connect to my workbook, and it's going to say what table or worksheet do you want. Now I think if you saw, the actual sheet was in AppStudio Data, and it's going to show me all the different columns and it's going to guess what those columns actually are. Now if I wanted to do a bit more accurate working in terms of checking whether those fields are dates, months, whether they're numeric, whether they're textual values, I can click on examine and say just examine a subset of that data and take a guess on what you think the field should be. Now of course if I want to change any of those, sorry I've come out of that object, if I just go back in here, if I want to change any of those I can do so. And this is really for people who know a little bit more about what they're doing here. I can go into edit here and I can change the type, the way the actual SQL Server actually stores the data, and I can change that here to in this case a textual field of unlimited length. Now I've done that, I've actually now picked a workbook, I've picked a table from that workbook or a worksheet from that workbook. If I want to see how does the data look at any stage, I just right click and click on view, and it will do everything it can in the model up to that point and then show me the data. So it's really good if we're transforming the data, because we can see what did the data look like before transformation, what did the data look like after transformation. And here we go, here I've got the data. So that all looks absolutely fine. Now the next thing, obviously in the real world here, we would obviously have to do more things to the data, transform the data, add calculations and so forth, but I'm going to just make this simple here. I'm going to say I want to create a SQL Server database from that data that I have. So I double click on the SQL Server object, I now double click on that to enter the parameters because it doesn't know what server or what table to create. So our demo server is called EiB Analytics. We don't use Windows authentication on there, so I've got SQL authentication on here, so I need a username and a password, and I can then give the name of the database. I'll call that int demo, and the table insurance demo. Click on OK. Now if I now process that, that will build the entire application. So it's going to go and get an Excel workbook, it's going to pick a worksheet from that workbook, it's going to store the data in the way that I suggested it should store it, and then it's going to write a SQL Server database for me without me having to understand the intricacies of SQL Server. Now I want to go further from that because I'm looking at a really high performance MI application, and I want to produce a cube now from that SQL Server data. So again, I just double click on the object here, and now it gives me the SQL Server cube object. I double click on that, and now I can do exactly the same again. I can actually type in the name of the server, and I can give that a name. I'll call that insurance cube. I might want to run this multiple times, so I'll delete the catalogue if it already exists. If I'm rerunning it again, I'm not here. And now if I process that entire design, that is now going to take the data from Excel, write it to a SQL Server database, recreate the SQL Server database, and now create a Microsoft OLAP cube for me. How long did that take? Now, of course, the real-world applications are going to be more complex than this, but the nice thing is you can see it's about putting a group of Lego bricks together, if you like, by just joining visual objects together. So now, if I go back to Excel, I'm just going to pick a brand new blank workbook here. And what I'm going to do now is, I know I've created a cube, the EiB Insurance Cube, so I'm going to actually go to my EiB Cube report ribbon here. I want a new report and I want to build that from the cube. I connect to the server that I've just built the cube on, and down here there should be one called, I've got obviously hundreds of cubes here, but there should be one called Insurance Cube, which there is. I can find out extra information about that cube by clicking on Show Cube Info, and that will tell me all the dimensions and stuff that it's found there, akin to Power BI really. And then if I click on Designer, that's going to connect me to the cube and give me a default view. Now here you can see by my default view I've got class of business in the rows. I'm going to take data source out of columns and say one of the things I probably want to look at it by is underwriting year. So I'm going to drag underwriting year to the columns, gives me all my underwriting year, double click on underwriting year and it will give me a breakdown by the 3 years that were in the data. Now one of the other great things we've added to EiB Analytics 2.18 is this thing called train of thought analysis, and I urge you to look at a separate video in this series that's just dedicated to that, but I can't help myself, I want to show you that again here because it's really powerful. Imagine if we develop this as a report. Now we give this to the user, but the user looks at this and says, I wonder how aviation or marine or 2017 was broken down by class or broken down by region. I could obviously add those one at a time into the criteria here, but I want to build up this train of thought. I want them to be able to ask questions on this report and get the answers now. So I'm going to set this up in advance for them. I'm going to go right click on any of these items here, and I'm going to say I want to perform a train of thought, analyze by, and I'm going to say the user might come into this report and suddenly want to break it down by region. They might come into this report and they want to break it down by type of business. They might want to look at it time-wise and break it down by month. And when I click on close, you'll see nothing happens to the report. But if I save this report away, open the report, and now I'm looking at the report as an end user, if I want to break this down, I can right-click on marine or any of these other items in the row and actually say, show me that please by region. Now I'm going to home in on marine, and you'll see that at the top. I can obviously change that class of business to aviation, and now I've got a breakdown by region. And I can say go to my current year or any year here and actually say why don't break that down by a month. So it's following on my train of thought, and now I'm focused on underwriting year 218. I've got my regions in my rows, I'm looking at my months, I'm looking for premium income. All of these are interactive, so of course if I wanted to double click on that and change that to total incurred claims, I can do so with ease. So that's just a short demonstration on EiB Analytics 218, and particularly looking at EiB AppStudio 218 on how we build visual applications, MI applications for the Microsoft platform.